Welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and today we are covering what may be the most consequential week in modern Middle Eastern history. US and Israeli strikes are hammering Iran, not just military targets, but medical research centers, areas near civilian airports. And the world's response? A French president calling military escalation unrealistic while bombs are already falling. This is not a hypothetical war. This is happening right now. Maya, let's get into it.
Alex, let's start with what's on the ground. Footage verified by Al Jazeera shows massive columns of smoke rising over Mashhad, Iran's second-largest city, home to over 3 million people. The strikes hit near Mashhad International Airport, a civilian aviation hub. We're not talking about a remote military installation in the desert. We're talking about a densely populated urban center, a holy city for Shia Muslims, being struck in proximity to civilian infrastructure. Ask yourself why that detail isn't leading every broadcast in the West.
And Mashhad isn't the only city under fire. Tehran itself, the capital, saw a strike on a medical research center. Iran's health ministry confirmed the attack. Let that sink in. A medical research facility. Under international humanitarian law, specifically the Geneva Conventions, medical facilities are protected targets. Striking one is not a gray area. It is a potential war crime. Yet I have seen zero major Western outlets frame it that way. The language is always sanitized, targets were struck, never, a hospital research center was bombed.
The health ministry statement is critical here because it comes from a government source confirming the target was medical in nature. Now, the US and Israel will likely claim it was a dual-use facility or housed weapons research. We've heard this playbook before, Iraq's supposed weapons of mass destruction, the Al-Shifa hospital raid in Gaza. The pattern is always the same. Strike first, justify later, and count on media amnesia to bury the follow-up reporting that inevitably shows the justification was thin or fabricated entirely.
Let's connect this to the broader strategic picture. Middle East Eye's afternoon recap lays it out plainly. This is a coordinated US-Israeli military campaign against Iran. Not a single strike. Not a targeted operation. A sustained bombing campaign across multiple Iranian cities. The question every journalist should be asking is, under what legal authority? Congress has not declared war on Iran. There is no UN Security Council resolution authorizing force. So what we're witnessing is, by definition, an illegal war of aggression under international law.
And that brings us to France and President Macron's comments from South Korea, reported by the South China Morning Post. Macron said a military operation to liberate the Strait of Hormuz is unrealistic. Now, pay close attention to his word choice. He didn't say it was wrong. He didn't say it was illegal. He said it was unrealistic. That is the language of a man calculating strategic feasibility, not moral principle. France is positioning itself as the voice of reason while carefully avoiding any actual condemnation of the strikes already underway.
Macron also lamented what he called Trump's differing daily statements on the Iran war and NATO. That's diplomatic speak for chaos. The President of the United States is publicly vacillating on war policy while bombs are falling on Iranian cities. Macron is telling us, between the lines, that allied nations cannot even determine what America's actual strategic objectives are. Is it regime change? Is it Strait of Hormuz control? Is it nuclear disarmament? Nobody knows, possibly including the people giving the orders.
And here's what the mainstream coverage consistently omits: who benefits from chaos in the Strait of Hormuz. Roughly 20% of the world's oil passes through that choke point. When you threaten it, oil prices spike. When oil prices spike, American shale producers and Gulf state exporters make windfall profits. Defense contractors see their stock prices soar. The people who lose are ordinary citizens worldwide paying more for fuel, food, and everything that moves by truck or ship. This isn't complicated. Follow the money.
The South China Morning Post's reporting from Hong Kong gives us a perspective you won't find in Washington or London. They note Macron's acknowledgement that the American position has varied. That diplomatic understatement masks something terrifying: the world's largest military is conducting strikes on a nation of 88 million people without a coherent, stable policy framework. France, a NATO ally and nuclear power, is publicly admitting it cannot predict what the United States will do next. That should alarm everyone regardless of political persuasion.
Let's talk about the Strait of Hormuz specifically. The framing of liberation is doing enormous propaganda work. You liberate people from oppression. You don't liberate a shipping lane. What's actually being discussed is military seizure of a maritime choke point that Iran has legal rights to under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Iran borders the strait. The US does not. Reframing military control of another nation's coastline as liberation is the kind of Orwellian language manufacturing that precedes every imperial adventure.
Now let's pivot to the story that connects the military campaign to a longer pattern of regional violence. Middle East Eye, citing a report by journalist Peter Oborn, warns that Israeli violence is threatening the future of Christians in Jerusalem. This is a story that should shatter the narrative framework of every Western politician who invokes defending Judeo-Christian civilization as justification for unconditional support of Israeli policy. The Christians who actually live in the Holy Land are telling you they are under threat from Israel.
The report details systematic violence, harassment, and institutional discrimination against Christian communities in Jerusalem. We're talking about communities that have maintained a continuous presence in the city for nearly 2,000 years. Armenian, Greek Orthodox, Catholic, Coptic, all of them reporting escalating attacks from Israeli settlers and inadequate protection from Israeli authorities. These aren't fringe allegations. Church leaders have been raising alarms for years, and the Western press largely ignores it because it complicates the preferred narrative.
Think about what this means geopolitically. The United States justifies its Middle East posture partly on protecting religious minorities and sacred sites. But the country receiving more American military aid than any other, Israel, is the one whose settlers are attacking Christian holy sites and clergy. American taxpayer dollars are subsidizing the very government whose citizens are driving Christians out of Jerusalem. That is not my opinion. That is what the people on the ground, the Christian leaders in Jerusalem, are reporting.
And this connects directly to the Iran strikes. Iran, for all its authoritarian governance, has one of the largest Christian populations in the Middle East, roughly 300,000 Armenians, Assyrians, and other denominations. When you bomb a country, you bomb everyone in it. The strikes near Mashhad, the strikes on Tehran, these endanger Iranian Christians too. So where are the evangelical leaders who claim to champion persecuted Christians? Silent. Because the bombs are falling in the right direction for their geopolitical preferences.
Let's pull back and look at the pattern. We have a military campaign against Iran with no congressional authorization and no UN mandate. We have strikes hitting medical facilities and areas near civilian airports. We have France publicly admitting it cannot follow American strategic logic. We have Christian communities in Jerusalem under documented threat from Israeli settlers. And we have an afternoon recap from Middle East Eye that reads like a war bulletin, because that's exactly what it is. This is a regional war, and it is escalating.
The mainstream media's failure here is not accidental. It is structural. When you look at who owns the major networks, who advertises on them, who sits on their boards, you find defense contractors, energy companies, and financial institutions that directly profit from Middle Eastern instability. Lockheed Martin doesn't buy ad time on the evening news because they want to sell fighter jets to viewers at home. They buy it to ensure the editorial framework never seriously questions whether those jets should be dropping bombs in the first place.
Source accountability matters here. Notice the outlets breaking these stories. South China Morning Post out of Hong Kong. Middle East Eye out of London with regional correspondents. Al Jazeera out of Doha. These are the outlets doing the actual journalism on this conflict. Meanwhile, American cable news is running split-screen coverage with retired generals providing expert analysis, the same generals who sit on defense company boards and collect consulting fees from the very firms selling the weapons being used in these strikes.
Macron's comments from South Korea are revealing in another way. Why is he making these statements from Seoul? Because South Korea understands what it means to live next to a nuclear-armed adversary. The subtext of Macron's visit is the growing anxiety among mid-tier powers that American unilateralism is destabilizing the entire global order. South Korea watches North Korea. France watches its energy dependence on Gulf oil. Both are calculating what happens when the United States acts without consulting its allies, and the answer terrifies them.
Let's talk about what happens next with the Strait of Hormuz. If the US or Israel escalates to attempting naval control of the strait, Iran has repeatedly stated it will close the waterway entirely. That would trigger an immediate global energy crisis. Europe, which is already dealing with energy insecurity after the Russia-Ukraine conflict, would face catastrophic price shocks. China and India, both major importers of Iranian oil through the strait, would view military seizure as a direct threat to their economic survival. This is how regional wars become global ones.
The medical research center strike in Tehran deserves deeper investigation. Iran has significant pharmaceutical and biomedical research infrastructure. During COVID, Iranian scientists developed multiple domestic vaccines precisely because sanctions restricted their access to Western alternatives. Destroying medical research capacity doesn't degrade military capability, it degrades public health infrastructure. If this strike targeted what Iran says it targeted, we're looking at an attack designed to weaken the civilian population's resilience. That has a name in international law, and it's collective punishment.
And we need to address the information vacuum. The summaries we're working from show that even accessing full reporting from Middle East requires parsing through raw HTML because their content delivery is being disrupted. Al Jazeera's coverage comes through RSS feeds that strip context. Journalists on the ground in Iran face communication blackouts during strikes. This is what information warfare looks like in practice, not just propaganda, but the physical and digital degradation of reporting infrastructure so that the truth arrives late, fragmented, and easily dismissed.
Peter Oborn's reporting on Christians in Jerusalem is particularly significant because Oborn is a veteran British journalist with deep establishment credentials, former chief political commentator at The Telegraph, former columnist at the Daily Mail. This is not a fringe voice. When someone with his background and access publishes a warning that Israeli violence threatens the very existence of Christian communities in Jerusalem, and the story barely registers in mainstream Western discourse, that silence tells you everything about editorial capture.
Let me be direct about something. The US government spent 20 years and trillions of dollars on wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, both launched on flawed or fabricated intelligence. Millions of people died. Entire societies were shattered. And now, without a single congressional vote, without a shred of public debate, the same machinery is grinding into action against a country 3 times the size of Iraq with a population nearly 3 times as large. If the Iraq war was a catastrophe, and it was, an Iran war has the potential to be an order of magnitude worse.
The economic dimension cannot be overstated. Iran is not Iraq. It is a founding member of OPEC. It has deep economic ties with China, India, Russia, and Turkey. Sanctions have already pushed Iran closer to the BRICS economic bloc. A full-scale military confrontation doesn't just disrupt oil markets, it accelerates the global shift away from dollar-denominated energy trading. The very weapon the US uses for economic coercion, the petrodollar system, is undermined every time Washington demonstrates that it will use military force to control energy choke points. The architects of this war may be destroying the foundation of American economic hegemony.
And who pays the human cost? Not the politicians. Not the defense executives. Not the cable news pundits. Iranian civilians near airports in Mashhad are paying it. Researchers at medical centers in Tehran are paying it. Christians in Jerusalem watching their 2,000-year presence erode are paying it. American service members who will be deployed without clear objectives or exit strategy will pay it. And working families worldwide will pay it at the gas pump, at the grocery store, in the inflation that always follows war.
Macron's characterization of the Strait of Hormuz plan as unrealistic is actually the most damning indictment available in diplomatic language. Diplomats don't say unrealistic lightly. It means, we've wargamed this, and it fails. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 nautical miles wide at its narrowest point. Iran's coastline dominates the northern shore. They have anti-ship missiles, fast attack boats, mines, and submarine capabilities specifically designed for this choke point. Every Pentagon simulation of a Hormuz confrontation results in catastrophic shipping losses in the opening days. Macron knows this.
So why is the operation being discussed at all if it's militarily unrealistic? Because the discussion itself serves a purpose. Floating the idea of liberating the strait normalizes the concept of military action against Iran. It shifts the Overton window. Yesterday it was sanctions. Today it's airstrikes on research centers and airports. Tomorrow it's liberating a shipping lane. Each escalation becomes the new baseline from which the next escalation is measured. This is not spontaneous. This is methodical escalation designed to manufacture consent for permanent military confrontation.
I want to return to the Al Jazeera footage from Mashhad because visual evidence matters. Columns of smoke near an international airport. That is not a precision strike on a buried weapons facility. That is visible, public, urban destruction. Every person in Mashhad could see that smoke. Every flight was disrupted. Every family in that city experienced the terror of explosions near their homes. And when those images circulate across the Middle East, across the global south, they don't see targeted military operations. They see a superpower bombing a city. Because that's what it is.
The afternoon recap from Middle East Eye reads like a grim inventory. Multiple Iranian cities struck. Civilian infrastructure affected. International condemnation muted or absent from Western capitals. This is the normalization phase. When a war begins and the expected outrage doesn't materialize, the aggressors take it as permission to continue. Every hour without meaningful diplomatic intervention, every news cycle that treats Iranian civilian casualties as background noise, extends a green light to the next round of strikes.
And let's not forget the nuclear dimension. Iran has enrichment facilities across the country. Strikes near populated areas risk releasing radiological material if enrichment infrastructure is hit, whether intentionally or through poor intelligence. The International Atomic Energy Agency has been warning for years about the dangers of military strikes near nuclear facilities. A miscalculation, one bomb hitting the wrong building, could create a radiological disaster affecting millions of Iranian civilians and potentially spreading contamination across borders into Iraq, Afghanistan, and Central Asia.
Here's the bottom line, and I'm going to say it plainly because Truth Report doesn't dress up uncomfortable realities. What we are witnessing is an illegal military campaign against a sovereign nation, conducted without congressional authorization, without UN mandate, hitting civilian infrastructure including medical facilities and areas near civilian airports. The primary beneficiaries are defense contractors, energy speculators, and political actors who need a foreign enemy to distract from domestic failures. The primary victims are civilians, Iranian, Christian, and eventually American.
And the information you need to understand this is being systematically kept from you. Not through censorship in the traditional sense, but through framing, omission, and the elevation of official sources over eyewitness testimony. When a Pentagon spokesperson says all targets were military in nature, that gets the headline. When Iran's health ministry says a medical research center was hit, that gets buried in a live blog update. The hierarchy of credibility in Western media ensures you hear the bomber's justification before you hear the victim's testimony. Every single time.
So what do we do with this information? First, seek out the sources we cited today: South China Morning Post, Middle East Eye, Al Jazeera. Read the reporting from journalists who are actually in the region. Second, demand answers from your representatives. Ask them, where is the congressional authorization for strikes on Iran? Under what legal framework are medical facilities being targeted? Who is profiting from the contracts supplying this campaign? Third, refuse to accept the sanitized language. When someone says targeted strike, ask targeted at what? When someone says collateral damage, say the word they're avoiding: civilians killed.
And remember that silence is a choice. When your government bombs a medical research center and your media doesn't call it what it is, the silence is not neutral. It is complicit. When Christian leaders in Jerusalem beg for the world's attention and the politicians who invoke Christianity for votes refuse to listen, that silence is not neutral. It is calculated. The greatest weapon in any unjust war is the indifference of people who could stop it. Do not be indifferent. Read. Question. Speak. Share. Demand accountability. That is not activism. That is citizenship.
For Truth Report, I'm Alex Truth. Stay informed, stay critical, and never accept the first draft of history. We'll see you tomorrow.